Good morning, everyone. That was a great start to day number 2. Excited to be here. Again, David Isaacson, Senior Vice President at Spectrum Gaming Capital. And here, the title of this panel is called Cashing In on the Canadian Bet. And just to set the stage a little bit, Ontario's iGaming and sports betting market went live on April 4th. So very recent. Ontario has a population of 14 million people, double the size of New Jersey. So it's obviously an impressive market with good demographics. The market levies a 20% gaming tax rate, which in my view is practical and enables a competitive market to develop. New operators that are there include Penn National via the Score brand, FanDuel, BetMGM, among others. And then you have incumbent, we'll call them gray market operators, but incumbents that have been operating there for many, many years, which we'll get into, Bet365, Betway. Some recent statistics in terms of download share during the first few weeks, the Score app generated about 50% of total downloads. Obviously, the Score is a Canadian media brand, so a lot of familiarity there. Followed by Bet365 at 35%, followed by FanDuel and BetMGM. So let's get right in. Paul, I want to go to you. We have Paul Burns here, who's the head of the Canadian Gaming Association. Can you kind of describe the history of the Canadian gaming market, the transition from a gray market to where you are now, all the things we talked about, market size, the operators that are there, what Canadians like to bet on? I mean, is it all hockey? Is it other stuff?
No, it's everything. Yeah, we've got Ontario is the first jurisdiction in Canada to create a legal regulated marketplace for online gaming. We've had a very large gray market in Canada, and that gray market came about because the Canadian law is unsettled on where does a bet occur? Is it your home, where my home is in Toronto, where I live, or is it the server that's in the UK or Isle of Man or Malta? And no one ever wanted to find out the answer to that question and go to court and enforce it. So lottery corporations who've had monopolies in their various jurisdictions over the years would have complained, but no one's ever done anything of concrete to do what's needed to be done, and that's what Ontario just did. They created a legal regulated marketplace. It's about 4 years of serious work to make it happen. There was a lot of consultation. The AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, the regulator, went out and spoke to regulators and industry to get their opinions on the market and what it should look like, knowing that they were, best way to describe it, last man in some respects in a lot of markets of creating a regulatory regime. And with that came what I think is a very fair regulatory model. Some people are surprised by it because it's a little different than what you've seen in the rest of North America, in the United States in particular. Operators are really the ones that are carrying the compliance costs. Suppliers do not have to be licensed. Game providers and technology providers need their equipment tested by independent laboratories to be active in the market. So some call it a lighter touch. I call it's probably more appropriate for today's gaming world, taking a lot of attributes from the European markets. It looks more like a European market than it would anything we've seen in North America. But there's $1 billion plus of GGR being created in the gray market in Canada over the years, about half of that from Ontario. So it's not new. I call it a semi-mature market. Because we've had legacy operators like 365 and Kindred and Betway, Leo Vegas, Pinnacle have been in the market for a long time. Canadians have been betting. Canadian operators couldn't do it. We had to change the laws, which we did last year in 21, which was a great attribute for the marketplace because it represents about 40% of the market. And if you can't open with that, it was kind of hard to make this market work. So that's where we got to this point. And so we've seen 23, 24 licensing in the market now. The expectation that will grow to 40 plus in the coming months because the bar to entry is not very high. It's a $100,000 licensing fee annually and the 20% rev share. And after that, it's just getting through a licensing and compliance program and launching a product. So that's not available in many places for a lot of companies to be able to access. That's what's made it so popular, and we're thrilled because it's actually going to create a strong industry in Ontario and hopefully the rest of Canada.
Sure. What's interesting to me about Ontario is that, you see in other markets, most recently the Netherlands, which basically, they decided they're going to regulate, they shut down their market, everyone stops taking bets, and then, they kind of start from scratch. But
You didn't have to do that.
Ontario's not like that. It's different. They're letting these gray market operators continue to operate. Gray sounds very bad.
No, it's what it was.
Maybe
Better than black.
Maybe we could just define when we say gray market operators for those that don't know what that means. Can you just?
Well, there was no licensing regime to sign up for anywhere. So not that a lot of people wanted to and asked for many, many years to. Can you give us a regulatory regime? We'd like to sign up. We'd like to pay taxes. I mean, not many companies knock on government's doors to do that, but the online gaming industry did. And when we got to this point, so what really the principle that guided this was, is channelization. How do we get more of the gray market operator into a regulated marketplace? How do we make that easy? So no cutoff period, don't have to leave. You have to file an application before April 4th, the day the market opened. And you're allowed to stay in the market.
Yeah.
And just move your customers in. They have to re-KYC them. They have to follow absolutely more rules, especially around advertising and other things. But they've made it attractive to do, and that's why you're getting the numbers. That's why you may see very high channelization rates in year one. That probably hasn't been seen in many markets because of what they've done. And I think that's the success of this, and it's recognizing the position they were in, that this was happening around there. There was no regulatory oversight.
Very practical. Very
It was.
practical. Neil, I want to go to you now. Neil, you run a payments business, and obviously you're operating in the States and also in Canada. Can you talk about your experience starting in Canada, the licensing process, and other pitfalls that you encountered along the way, or maybe conveniences about this new Ontario market?
Sure. I think, for us, we've been processing regulated gaming transactions for close to 20 years around the world. So when you think about it, this really is just a new market, but it's not really different than what we've been doing for close to 2 decades. And so working with a lot of the operators who are now licensed in Ontario previously in other jurisdictions, whether that be in Europe or in the United States when they came online in the last few years, this is just an extension, right? So depending on who you ask, and everyone can kind of, come up with their own figures, this really becomes like anywhere between the 4th and 5th largest state in North America, right? I mean, depending on which stats you're looking at. So really this was just an extension of what we're already doing. Paul mentioned from a licensing perspective, doesn't really affect the suppliers like us. So in the States, it's a little bit different. We have to become a registered vendor in every state in which we operate. And obviously we're registered with, the province of Ontario. However, we now process for all of the largest operators in there. And why is that important? Because we have the experience in Europe, because we have the experience in LATAM, because we have the experience now in the United States, we can handhold these new operators who are coming into Ontario. So, we talked a lot about this, but Ontario is not a new market, right? For the reasons that Paul just described. It's not new. Canadians have been, and in Ontario, have been placing sports betting wagers for 15 years, right? What is new is that it's now regulated. And so some of the operators who have never been there before, you mentioned a few of them, all the ones you mentioned off the top, the Score, FanDuel, MGM, et cetera, they wouldn't go into the market until it was licensed, until it was regulated, right? So some of these brands haven't. So now there's this opportunity for some of the largest gaming companies in the world to enter the market. So honestly, I think it's been, every new market has some growing pains for sure, but I think it's been an incredible start. We're literally a month in, and I think it's been great.
Excellent. We have 2 operators here that you guys, Amanda and Niki, Amanda representing Kindred and Niki representing Pinnacle. You both have operated in the Canadian market prior to regulation, which was only a month ago. So can you talk about what the market and the competitive dynamics was before, and what you're seeing over the last 5 or 6 weeks? That how has the business changed, the competitive dynamics? Amanda, we'll start with you.
It's interesting because when you start trying to compare the before and afters, I was saying anecdotally yesterday, it's almost like a magic 8-ball has as much information as I do, because prior to the market becoming legal and regulated in Ontario, the best we could do is buy market research reports, and we were probably all buying the same ones, and it would show that, Bet365 had the largest market share and Betway had the second largest market share, and everyone else trailed after that. Now, maybe I need to start, sending invitations out for some Tuesday cocktails with my colleagues in Toronto, and we can have some discussions about how we're all doing, but we're not exactly sharing information just yet, and iGaming Ontario is not yet releasing any market stat information. So once that information becomes public, I think we'll have a much better understanding of, what's going on in the market. The competitive dynamic right now is really about the advertising because, as we've all said, there's been a very healthy gray market that existed in Ontario, but it was illegal to advertise. So the biggest change right now for any customer is seeing advertising now on billboards, on, during the hockey games, during sports games. And that is the most obvious change right now. But in terms of, the competitive dynamic, we have new operators coming into the market that have never been accessible to Ontario customers before. And just, I'm sure there's a lot of new customers that are giving several operators a try. They're, checking many of them out at, the same time. And, we still have a whole slew of big names that haven't entered into the market yet. So if you give it a few more months, we'll have more operators coming in. And I think we really need that first year to come and go for us to get a true sense of where things are going to level out.
Niki, would you like to comment on the competitive dynamics and Pinnacle's experience?
Sure. I think what Amanda said is absolutely spot on. The competitive dynamic today versus what it was prior to April 4th is really an evolution. So you have this continuity of experience that customers expect. Our punters know that the market is regulating. They understand that the laws are changing. And I venture to give a lot of credit to iGaming Ontario as well as the AGCO for understanding their constituency and understanding what brand loyalty not only means to their consumers, but also to the operators who have existed previously. When you talk about competition and you talk about new and existing operators transitioning or being welcomed to the market, you raised a good point about the Netherlands. Pinnacle experienced a similar transition period in Sweden. We're currently licensed and operating in Sweden, but we were happy to exit that market in order to help the Swedish regulator achieve its goals of regulation. Whereas in Ontario, you see a much more seamless transition period from what April 3rd was to what April 4th is. And that's through a lot of research, it's through a lot of conversation and a really deep understanding of what the social stigma or consumer preference was for the past 15, 20 years. Pinnacle is one of the longest standing sports books and longest standing brands in the world. So when you talk about the opportunity to engage with other market companions in a jurisdiction like Ontario, we're happy for the competition and we're happy to see what that drives us to do to make our brand stronger and to bring more loyalty amongst our existing customers.
Let's just talk about, I want to talk about advertising because you both mentioned it, and I think we can open this question to all four of you. But, in New Jersey, there's a glut of advertising, and, obviously the last day and at every conference we talk about the path to profitability or lack thereof. I know that in Canada there's restrictions on advertising, but a billion-dollar market was able to develop and function without that advertising, and now that's changing. So maybe you can just comment on what that means for the market. Do you expect those U.S. companies that like to spend a lot of money offering free play and advertising, do you expect them to come in and act the same way in Canada that they are in New Jersey and New York and other competitive markets? Amanda, why don't we start with you on that?
Well, it's interesting because if you look at the first iteration of the standards the AGCO put out before the market opened, it was an absolute prohibition on all advertising, all bonuses, all inducements. And then after some pushback from the industry, they changed their standards. So how we all operate right now is we can advertise. It's just we can't put bonuses or inducements on any of the public advertising. Once we register a customer, they create an account, they accept the terms and conditions, then we can start sending them whatever we want. But the public-facing advertising, and this was done deliberately by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission as a RG check, because again, we've had gaming in this province for a long time. They knew that what would be new to customers and Ontarians would be the volume of advertising. So one way to ensure that this market was going to get launched responsibly was to limit those big aggressive figures that we know existed in a lot of the states when the states opened up. So we don't see that in Ontario currently. And it's been a way, in some discussions with operators, it's been a way of almost just kind of making it a more level playing field, because the beauty of Ontario is because it's open licensing, anyone can come in as long as they meet the requirements. So you will have operators of different shapes and sizes coming in, which is what you want. You don't want one size fits all for the customers. And so this way, at least if you're able to come in and you're not worried about having to, do those big splashy billboards, then, hopefully that just helps more operators find this market attractive too.
Paul, do you want to comment on how you think that impacts kind of the size of the market and the competitive dynamics?
I think it's, as operators have said to me, it's now we can compete on product. And that's something that everybody was quite welcoming to, I think, in the sense of not into an offer race. But we also talk a lot about building a sustainable industry. We've seen ad bans creeping across Europe and other parts of the world. And the AGCO, IGO, and the industry is very aware of that. And that's where, we're as a CGA we're even talking to broadcasters, and as they talk about their sports betting programming, is what kind of RG programming are you adding into your marketplace? What kind of, we have to, even discussions on limiting share of voice from broadcasters, because you want to build, it's about sustainability. It's not about who can grab as much money as quickly as you can. It's let's play the long game here. And that's the conversation. Everybody has been really great about that conversation, and everybody's taking it very seriously. Yeah, we have more advertising. We're going to. That's fine. Obviously the taking out bonusing and inducements makes it different, but it's. I think we've found a nice balance to start, and people we have more advertising because we have lots of operators. That's fine, and not everybody uses television. Not everybody uses mass media. The affiliates, I think, will grow. I mean, we've seen North America hasn't really adapted to the affiliate model as well as Europe. It's a much smaller percentage of ad spend. I think that'll grow in Ontario. I think that'll grow in other parts, because you may see regulators, and we know this, is that when you get political solutions to bad headlines, it's never really good. And it doesn't work out well for our industry when that happens. So you try and tell everybody, it's like, keep that in mind. Because it's very easy for a politician to stand up on any given day and say, we're going to ban advertising. It happens like that. It's done. It's painless. They can think about it over coffee in the morning and announce it by lunch. And it's done. And that's what we got to avoid. And that's even the conversations I've had with Bill Miller, the AGA. We have to look at sustainability for our industry. We have to make sure that that's the building healthy customers is part of the equation. And that's everybody's, antennas are up. Everybody's engaged. And Ontario, in the way they structured the market, I think is going to lead in a lot of that way. So,
Neil, I want to change the question for you a little bit to be more financial and payment focused. But can you talk about the banking experience in Ontario and how you'd compare it to the States? I know I am a New Jersey resident, and in 2018, I had some difficulty funding my account on at least initially. It was a little bit complicated and cumbersome. Can you talk about banking and acceptability of this new regulated market, and anything you're seeing, any trends so far?
Sure. And I think you bring up a good point about what it was like in New Jersey then and what it's like now. And that goes to show you what happens when a market matures. Obviously, things get better. The good news, bless you, the good news in Canada is that it's not an overly complicated kind of financial system. We don't have thousands of banks. There's a few, bless you. There's a couple of major banks that are the card issuers, right? So it's not like you're dealing with the same thing in the US where it'll take years for things to get better. And we don't have many different forms of alternative payments. We have our own debit system, which is Interact for those that are not familiar. So they're really, how are you paying? You're paying with your credit or debit card, you're paying with your bank account, or you're using the debit rails, right? Those are pretty much the main way. So you're not like kind of reinventing anything. And what happens is, and I'm always careful talking about this because, and I said this yesterday, like payments are the lifeblood of this business, but it's the most boring thing we can talk about. And so, it's just the reality, right?
If you can't separate customers from their money, you can't be in the gambling business.
What do customers want and what do the operators want? They want a way for their customers to make a deposit quickly and safely, and the customer wants to be able to withdraw their money quickly and safely. So that's where, Nuvei comes in. That's where we help the operators and their customers do that, essentially. Making sure that, we just talked about all the competition, making sure that as these operators and others are spending all this money to attract new customers, that when someone gets to their site, their deposit better work, right? They just spent, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars acquiring that customer. So we have to provide a solution for them to make it work. And then that customer, when they win, they want to get their money out quickly. So today what we've seen is a pretty good start, as again, we have the benefit of looking at what other markets have happened, in there at the beginning of their launch. There's a few banks still that are not allowing gaming transactions from occurring, which is obviously a pain point. We work very closely with these banks, with the managing directors of the banks, working closely with the card brands, working closely, obviously, with Paul and the CGA to try and help educate them and realize that, hey, these are licensed, regulated operators governed by the province of Ontario. This isn't someone that shouldn't be operating here. We only work with licensed operators. So there's an education process, but again, we're a month in. And so far, I think that if you kind of look at it from high up above, I think it's been a really good start.
Niki, can you talk about, you mentioned on our call, esports is an important vertical for your company, and especially in Canada. So can you talk about some of the unique characteristics about the Canadian market, kind of just educate us on what people are gambling on and how they like to do it?
Sure. Full disclosure, I am not a Canadian, but I will give credit to my fellow Canadians on the panel if you want to chime in terms of consumer preferences. But, Pinnacle took the first esports wager in 2010 on its website, and we've continued to foster that risk management model, and we've continued to foster that product offering throughout the world where we do offer services. Ontario has really adopted a wide-spanned approach to what events and what markets an operator can put up on its site, which really does, again, I venture to give a lot of credit to those who were involved in the policy making and the decision making as to how to really channel the gray market into the licensed and regulated market, with giving our customers options for what they want to wager on. You don't see a lot of prohibitions on certain events. You don't see a lot of prohibitions on what types of markets can go up. Of course, there are parameters to that. But with things like esports and other unique or niche markets that can be offered, there's a bigger opportunity for Ontario to reap the benefits, as well as operators to reap the benefits from what that expansion looks like. Which is really one of the main factors as to why it is such an attractive market, not just for local operators, but for international operators as well.
Amanda, do you want to comment on, kind of what your customers are doing and some of the things that you see in this market that's different than other markets?
Well, I think what's really wonderful about the Ontario market from the Kindred and the Unibet perspective is that we have such a very sports hungry fan base, and we have such wonderful sports teams. I think there might be a few disappointed faces for anyone who was watching the Leafs game last night in the audience today. Long suffering is the best way to describe us.
Yes.
But anyway, you look at some of the sponsorship and partnership opportunities that have been launched in the province, and I mean, would you have ever picked curling as being one of the first ones being introduced? I don't think you would have seen that in any of the US states. So I think there's the opportunity to tap into some of the unique characteristics that make Canadians, a little bit different than our neighbors to the south. And it will really allow operators like Kindred to come in and try to offer things that are different to the customers here. We're going to be, I would say 80%, our customers are going to be 80% similar to customers in the States, but that 20% differentiation is going to be really critical. And for us, we are really, really focused on being hyper local to our customers and making sure that as we're coming in and we're figuring things out and, making sure that it is the best offer we can give them, but also it's very local to the market in Ontario, because it would be really hard for an operator to launch in this really critical market without having people in the market that understand it. I think it would be a really hard market to run, remotely.
Got it. We have 5 minutes left. I just want to pan the audience. Is there any questions about Canada, Ontario? Anything you want to ask our panelists? Does not look like it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the land-based gaming industry, right? There's a very robust casino industry across many provinces in Canada. So Paul, I want to go to you first. How, as the CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, I would think you hear from the land-based operators. They want to either work with digital or they're against it or somewhere in between. Can you talk a little bit about, from their perspective, what they're saying and what they're seeing, what they're saying, and possibly complaining about?
Well, it's the land-based operators in Ontario are able to access the online space, and that's something they wanted. The premise that we've always worked from the industry was that they needed to level the playing field when they started to do this, a regulatory playing field that needed to be level for our operators. It didn't come out exactly the way I think everybody wanted it to, because the casino sector, we have this provision called conduct and manage. And so one of the unique features, not only is there a regulator, but all the iGaming operators sign commercial contracts with iGaming Ontario. And so there's a commercial contract through the revenue, because we don't call it a tax, it's a revenue share model, because it can't in Canada, because of the overarching laws are in the criminal code. This is a long way to get to an answer that shouldn't take this long. But anyway, welcome to the complexities of Canadian gaming law. So with the iGaming Ontario contract, all the online operators have to sign. Well, the land-based casino operators have one with Ontario Lottery and Gaming for their casino operations. They were just handed a second one, a second compliance program, a second reporting mechanism, second AML regime. And that's not a sustainable model. And that's we still need to work on that, because that was not, adding red tape and adding regulatory burden was not one of the objectives the government had going into this. And so that's made it hard to getting the regulatory framework. And I think part of it is that the casino operator's partner was not exactly working hard on their behalf. I'll be blunt about that. I think they let them down, and that's why they haven't been launched. They're coming soon. They're going to be very robust. They're going to have a great offering. And they're in the middle of a lot of capital development too, which is, the pandemic got in the way of some of
Will
that.
it include a retail sports books and
Yeah.
casino?
Yeah, unfortunate part has been they could have opened a retail sports book anytime after the end of August last year.
Okay.
Their partner, Ontario Lottery and Gaming, has not gotten them in the market, frankly, and that's been disappointing. And I'll be blunt, that's one of the really frustrating parts for the casino operators, because they could have had retail sportsbook open last fall, and they don't. And that's because of the nature of these relationships has gotten in the way. And so that's been the frustrating part. There is, again, the ability to get some of the red tape and bureaucracy out of their way, I think has got to be the next goal, to create that level playing field. And that's what they need. And so to get them in and be active, because they want it. They want access. They want to create that experience for their customer. And we just need their agencies who they work with to hurry up, frankly, and get on with it so they can get in and be competitive. Yeah.
Amanda, Niki, do you want to comment on your land-based counterparts, if at all?
Yeah, at this point in time, Unibet is only operating online in Ontario, so we don't have any relationships with the land-based in Ontario.
Okay.
Pinnacle is looking forward to joining and very interested in joining the regulated iGaming market in Ontario. But I think generally, with respect to digital versus land-based offerings, it depends on the constituency and it depends on the experience as well. In the United States, you see a lot of tethering between retail and between mobile and even media tie-ups of that nature. But the development and what we'll see flourish in Ontario will really depend on what we see in the next few months in terms of more operators coming online, and of course how the casinos and how the retail and land-based gaming responds.
Because we have in Ontario, it's like Mohegan, Hard Rock are there, and they've had that experience in other jurisdictions. Great Canadian, which is the largest operator in the country, has obviously working with through their now new ownership group and Apollo and getting online, but they're looking for partnerships too. Like they're going to sports books and other things to work with operators. I think they want to make sure that they can really drive business in their doors. That's the key, and especially we experienced very, very long periods of closure, 17 months for most of the casinos in the country, and that was punishing. And that's why we were kind of like, can you hurry up and get on with this so they can get back into business?
Okay, our time is up. We look forward to hearing big things, continue to hear big things out of Canada. Let's have a round of applause for our panel.